Hello, welcome to episode 5 of the End of the Beginning podcast. In this episode, we chat about kindness to self, the place our ethereal and physical beings meet, and the levels of enlightenment. We touch on normalising self-love, whether modern schooling is ready for the upcoming AI world, and the inner yes and outer no theory. We hope you enjoy what you hear, and if you'd like to submit any questions for upcoming episodes, please contact us at theendofthebeginningpodcast@gmail.com. Alternatively, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Instagram. Thanks for listening.
So newness, that's a nice place to start.
Yeah.
Experiencing something that's new. So, I don't know, this is just what comes to mind, so we can totally drop it. But the thing we were just talking about is new. The thing you're working through on that personal level, and the willingness to sit in that and going, here's the system of values I'm living from. This is in conflict with what this shouldn't generate turbulence, but it's generating turbulence. I am out in space in somewhere really, really new. And perhaps the juiciest tool to inject into your system in those moments is like, I'm going to work with the universe. I'm going to work with the circumstance that's arisen as a welcome thing. And stretching it out to 3 and 4D, whatever, to allow all the features of the human experience, and that includes you welcome in your mind's reaction to it, like the judgments and positions it adopts, and you welcome in the emotional turmoil of it. So it's like the spiritual parts, it's like, just give me more, let's just do it. This is just opportunity to expand. It's like, cool, but the way we make that authentic is by going, and also I feel betrayed, I feel overwhelmed, I feel maligned, and then the mind positions of like, this is wrong and this is how we should be living, and like, not that we skip by all of that and just go, this is just the richest opportunity, I'm so lucky. That is a really welcome part of it, but it's no more than half of the story. And the other half encompasses those mind positions. It's like, given where I've come from as a whatever in this time in human history, this is how I relate to this intellectually. And so that's welcomed in as part of it. We don't have to act from it, but it's a welcome ingredient in the cake. And then the emotional contours of like, God, I feel, if I'm really honest, I feel like borderline panic attack, overwhelmed with what's being revealed in my world. Like the way people are treating me or something is really fierce to sit with if we're really honest with it. And then once you're really honest with it, you find it doesn't have to be the defining characteristics of the story.
Yeah.
The kind of freedom you want from that spiritual half of yourself, of holding a higher perspective, this is all great, this is all welcome, I'm going to work with this. You get to that in a more authentic and pronounced way by being really, really true with the emotion, which is like, I actually feel... So for me, and this is something I've experienced, like here I am in relationship with a woman that I love, let's say non-spousally, because that's the example in my head, and I'm actually experiencing anxiety at the vulnerability that I feel here, even though I'm a man and I'm bigger and stronger. So this would be the mind positions,
right? But
the emotion, the truth of the emotion is the emotion. And it's like, sometimes that's our little child. So it's like, okay, it's not reasonable for a 39-year-old to feel anxious to the point of fear of a 5'6", 55 kilo woman. But if it's the 3-year-old boy inside of me, okay, well, all right, that makes more sense. I can hold space for that, and no one knows. I don't have to tell everybody that I'm feeling a 3-year-old child level of fear in the face of a relatively tiny little woman. And so, so making peace with the mind, making peace with the emotion by meeting the 3-year-old boy in all that turmoil. And this is something that's happened for me recently, going, that's actually fear. I'm actually afraid of this person. Whoa. My mind, if the mind didn't give way, there never could have been the space for that emotional reality to be there. And then the insight comes in, it's because it's a 3-year-old aspect of myself. And so soothing the mind, soothing the emotion, and then it expands. They've both been met. They've both been seen. they've both been soothed, and now it can now it expands into the more spiritual reality. Opportunity seized, opportunity integrated, opportunity embodied. I've met the moment, and now I can expand into a bigger version of myself. Does that land?
Yeah, of course.
Just a gentle little G-rated thing to start with. Far out.
Yeah, my experience of that we were talking about off air and stuff is, just being, and this is something I've been working on lately, is just being okay to be wrong, or being okay to have, I said blind spots, and you're like, oh, you could be more gentle with yourself than that. But I mean that like without the kind of sting, like without the sting in it. And giving myself the space to be expanding rather than just I'm expanded or whatever it is.
Right, yeah.
Like giving yourself...
That's a beautiful nuance, I think. Yeah.
To be able to... There's a Luca Fogale, I think the artist's name is. Kyle put me onto him, and there's a beautiful song that he's written, and one of the lyrics is, I'm going to butcher it, but it's something like, you are not broken, you're not something, you're not broken, you are unfolding. And I just think there's something so beautiful about that simple phrase, that you're constantly unfolding, and the kind of more gentle you can be with that unfolding, the more understanding you can be, and the more humble you can kind of be about it. I know you don't necessarily prescribe to, because it can go to a unhelpful level, right? That faux humbleness. I think we chat about that from time to time, where it doesn't serve you anymore because you're being overly,
death by humility.
In lack, yeah. But yeah, I think there's something really beautiful about cutting yourself some slack.
Oh yeah.
I find so many people I talk to, and it's not always artists, it's, it's just everybody really. We're all really hard on ourselves. And I think sometimes, like I have a friend who he can't not be hard on himself. Like he can't find a space in himself that's not like, you're an a-hole,
But yeah, the beating the living shit out of yourself is this adage of would I treat Paul the way I treated myself 2 days ago or something? And the reality is that I can't imagine it.
Yeah.
And with that's a present part of the human experience still for me, is that we could be that fierce with ourselves and that unreasonable in the way we relate. The inversion, something that I really love to play with, is as we grow into ourselves more and more, we're running out of reasons to fall out of love with ourselves.
Beautiful.
I think we said that in the context of parenting in some way. I'm reminded of it. So there's less and less good reasons to fall out of love with myself. So someone comes to you and says like, hey, I think that you're out of integrity here. And you go, maybe. Maybe. If that is true, in degrees of magnitude, maybe the full bore, maybe criminal, maybe really, really intense. You could argue that that the actual measuring stick of how much you've grown on a spiritual or personal level is your ability to maintain an interface with self-love despite that. Which is super, super fierce. And it does lend to this sort of flaky, well, I'll do whatever I want because it's all God anyway. It's like, well, no, not if we're authentically connected to our heart. And so you're feeling the whack of someone you love saying like, I don't think you are who you say you are. And you're like, ooh, geez, that hurts. Can I sit with the pain and stay connected to myself at the same time? Inevitably, we fall off that horse and we get back on. So in some ways, it's like, how short a period of collapse is there? And that might be a measure of how well we're doing. How much self-compassion can we have while we're feeling horrific about ourselves? Like all those things.
That's really nice. Like just self-compassion.
As a concept.
I don't know why. For me, that just really jumped out.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's such a beautiful way to phrase giving yourself, cutting yourself some slack, self-compassion. Like what a beautiful turn of phrase.
It is. And I think it points, ironically, coincidentally, whichever, to what we were just talking about. So we treat ourselves with a fierceness and a criticality that we don't treat others with. inversely, something like self-compassion can just penetrate so deeply. It's like, well, in a more perfect utopian whatever world, it wouldn't, because self-compassion would be a given. I feel compassion for Paul. Why wouldn't I feel compassion for Luke to the same order?
Mm-hmm.
It's trickier.
Do you think, like, given that little angle that you just took, do you think, as within, so without, or the opposite as well? So, like, the release of judgment, I know we've chatted about that before, but do you think that there's a direct tie between judgment of self and amount of self-compassion that's available?
Yeah, I think functionally there would have to be. Because one would obscure the space, one would remove space for the other to be present. So if I'm tearing myself to shreds, if I'm too busy doing that and the bandwidth's being chewed up by self-criticality, where's the space for compassion? And yet, understanding that it is a natural part of things, I did this here and I don't feel great about it, so we're sitting with the emotional reality, but it's like the cloud and the blue sky. So the cloud was the criticality, what's the word, like the self-critic, or the inner cynic, or whatever the language is. And then there's that would be the cloud, and then how much blue sky is around it. It's like, okay, there is a process of me beating myself up a little bit here as I work out what the forest for the trees. Like, did I really step on toes? Was it horrific? What's really going on in the orders of intellect, like the mind component and the heart component, as we just outlined. And then the blue sky would be, I'm going to hold space for this process. There is a man in the middle of this, a person in the middle of this, and he's got an inner child, and he's got spiritual aspirations, and he's got a bunch of people he cares about, and he comes from this background, and to the extent that it feels, that you buy into it, he's got reincarnating contributing factors too, like pre-carnal stuff and all these factors, and it's like, is it reasonable for him to be exactly where he is? And from there, it's like, yeah, I can see compassion for that. It's like treating yourself as a third person almost. Well, yeah. The story of Luke, or... Yeah. I think coming right back, I find it more... One might find it easier to create that open space of compassion and understanding for another more than they do for themselves. Is there a risk of detachment if you do that, do you think? Or do you think it is just a tool, like a mechanism for perspective? I'm trying to work out I think if we're being authentic and if we're connected to our heart, now authenticity isn't something binary, it's something that's a spectrum that we align with or without in a moment, that we align with or away from, deviate from in a moment. So what tends to happen is if you're coming from love in a moment, it's very hard to bypass your capacity to hurt another. So that's the risk to me, is that I think that we're pointing to, is that if I'm so busy forgiving myself, then I could be capable of horrible things. But if we're centered and we're in our heart in any way in that moment, then our desire is not going to be to dominate or to withdraw from authenticity. It's going to be to be loving ourselves, which is going to inspire or even require us to be loving towards others in some way. So we can't just whitewash, flaky, spiritual bypass this whole thing. I'm sort of butchering the language, but do you know what I mean? Like, how do we know that we're not being too kind to ourselves? And the answer would be, well, if you're in touch with your heart, you will feel a resonance with other beings. And to that end, that we are coming from love, we can do no wrong. Because you will have a natural, like, if I hurt Paul, it will hurt me. There is a coding built into us that we are in touch with. So one of the things that is interesting is that, hold on, so you just went from a spiritual dialogue that was incorporating, it's like a primary spiritual dialogue, we'd say this incorporating intellectual and therefore neurological and emotional layers. So hold on, but if we then go and say, well, this is an intellectual problem or psychological, psychiatric, psychopathic problem, then how does that infer the spiritual stuff? A little bit like conversation we're having off air, if I get my body chem muddled, then there's all these consequences and that's all that's going on. It's like, oh, hold on, did we just turn off the ability for spirituality to be at play here? Whereas for me, the reality is that they're always interconnected. If there's a spectrum between the most ethereal layerings of ourself through to the most visceral, dense, and so it would be skin and actual viscera. And somewhere in the middle, this is a feeling thing, just an idea that I have in my head that I toy with, is the nervous system. So it's as if we recalibrate that statement, then it's like the place that our ethereal and our physical bodies meet and interfaces, and maybe in some ways intertwines, is the nervous system. And a fun cross-examination of that idea is that, you know, the best parts of contemporary psychology are the representation of that. So you do see corollary between traditional Buddhism and contemporary psychology. And you do see crossover between Jungianism and shadow work and some traditional spiritual paths. And so that takes the psychology can be a figurehead for that in some ways. Maybe figurehead's too long, just an almost like an anthropomorphization of it. Yeah. And so that's kind of where they appear. But coming back to what we're saying about psychopathy, it's like, well, that would infer that what's going on in the nervous system is mirrored in spirituality somehow. And so the premise is like, can you have beings that are disconnected from human empathy in a real, not just a moment, but in a robust, maybe decades on, like a whole lifetime of never experiencing human empathy in a way that would validate it to really matter relative to you. So most humans, I think, are experiencing empathy to such a high degree that it is what it is to be human.
Do you think, like, sometimes I wonder if my empathy's at a point where it's not actually helpful.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
You know what I mean? And then a lot of the time I'm surprised by the lack of awareness.
Yeah, I'll rephrase it. If you take out the ability to authentically relate, are you still human? That's the medium in which I mean that. Being human is about relating.
Yeah. I guess also too, if you look at someone who's in a psychopathic or psychotic state, then they're experiencing a very extreme version of singularity or separateness, because they lack the ability to take any other person or any other being into account. Yeah. Which is kind of almost what empathy is, right? Mm-hmm. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah, so what does any of this mean?
Can you imagine if, like, your first incarnation is psychopathic tendencies? Imagine if you're a freshie and you're just like super psychopathic. You have no relationship to anything because you're singular, from the mass to the singular. Mm-hmm. And then you work your way up through lifetimes to acquire the ability of empathy. It's kind of a weird concept, but
I don't think that's weird. I actually think that's one of the prevailing theories about what's actually going on.
Really?
Yeah, there's a teacher called Matt Kahn who does some beautiful work. Well, no, this is how it works though. I think this is how it works, which is part of why I think we have Q&A, is to go, what are you working with right now? And then we go, oh, that's inspired. Yeah. That's beautifully authentic. That's intriguing to unpack. And also that's resonant with what I'm going through in some sense. And so that last one is, to me, well, that's the flavor of the frontier we're all on. And it's an example of our interconnectivity that we've got.
Yes, totally. The conscious field.
Yeah, so there's something so beautiful about us doing this work together. And yet to do it authentically, it does require you be deeply intimate with yourself first. Yes. But then we can come out and go, I'm experiencing this in my spacesuit. What are you experiencing in your spacesuit? Like, wow. Yeah, so some elegant balance between the individuality of that and the interconnectedness of that, and just bouncing between the two. And so, we were saying before, like, can you have enough humility? Can you have too much humility? They're all, to me, the personality traits of God that we get to dance with experientially. So in that example, it would be, well, the sovereignty of what it is to be divine, and then the inescapable connection and union that it is to be divine. So we're experiencing the different aspects, and they actually contrast each other beautifully as well. As if that we're just amassing experiences in the different personality traits of the one, which is us as well. So, there's no separation there.
Does Matt Kahn talk about that idea?
Thank you. So he talks about I would invite anybody to hold this structure lightly. It's something that's been quite compelling for me over the years. I think it's probably old, like maybe 10 years or something. But he floats the idea of there is a first stage enlightenment. And again, let's hold enlightenment really lightly. There's a first stage enlightenment, and that would suggest there's second, third, and so on. And if this is infinity, it goes on and on and on. So the first stage enlightenment is an enlightenment of the third eye, meaning that it's about consciousness. So a being enters a body, let's call them all human, and they work through different arrays of phenomenon in life so that their body of work in a spiritual sense is moving up through their bodies of consciousness, lifting from the base of their body out of their kind of animal and up and through different chakral centers is the assertion. This is quite Hindu in its way, that they come up and out through this middle channel of your body, and they come through the purifying as it moves up, and you have this expansion of consciousness. So basically, you thought you were just a gorilla man, and you work a woman, and you ascend through life experience to grow and grow and grow and grow and grow. Until your consciousness enlightens. So you realize you're not just a man, not just an animal, that you're actually an extension of source, having this experience of individuation. So that would be the consciousness awakening. And you also, in doing that, you thought it was just you, and you were the one, and then you worked out that like you were separate to all these other animals, and functioning from this survivalism of self-interest, and then you, as that consciousness integrates into you and becomes you in a way, as you awaken to who you really are, which is this God experiencing itself as an animal in that way, then you realize that there's only one of us in the room, and that this is happening for every other individuation. So he asserts that this is a first stage enlightenment, that it's about going from the earthy animal. This is my own language on the fly. It's not. It's what's the word?
Verbatim.
It's not verbatim. That you graduate up and maturate up and out of that animal into something of God consciousness, and then the consciousness is online, and he refers to it as a third eye enlightenment, which makes sense. He goes on to say that there's it's also masculine in its way, as in there is all this form, and I'm going to graduate up and out of form into infinity. And move along that masculine arc, and its directionality is up and out rather than down and in, and it's actually like Matrix style, waking up to this is a simulation, and that once I work out how unreal it is, I'm going to push it away more and more because it's not real, and I want to engage with it as real. Would be a denial of the true truth, which is infinity, which is nothingness. So there's a pushing away. There's like a death to life and a moving up and out. It sounds kind of brutal, but masculine energy does have its brutality. So this is the kind of suggestion. Again, we're just playing with a scaffolding of a system. The second stage, is that cool to jump to second stage?
No, I was literally about to go, what's the other ones?
So the second stage would be the opposite, would be a feminine enlightenment. So rather than an expansion and an occupation with the third eye, it's heart-centered. So it's like rather than more of a narcissistic disposition of like it's only me, and then working out, oh my God, there's actually all of us. And there's only one of us, and we're spread over all these fields, and anything I do to other is directly and proportionally impactful upon me. So the interconnectivity is the truth, rather than isolation and solarness or whatever. I feel like I'm making up a lot of words today. So the second stage is the feminine, and rather than up and out, it's down and in. Rather than pushing life away, it is how much, rather than pushing my human identity away, it's going, my consciousness is already awake. So remember, it's not A or B, it's stage one and stage two in his assertion.
So you move through.
You're actually ascending to it. So it implies the first has been done. So the third eye consciousness is already awake. You already know there's only one of us in the room, and yet you might be awake when you're 21 or something and going, well, now what the fuck do I do with the rest of my life? I've got another 80 years to clock over here. What am I going to do? So it becomes about, rather than pushing the simulation away, it's like, I know that I am not limited to this human body. I know there's only one of us in the room. My consciousness is awake, but I'm here on purpose. So I'm going to have the fullest human experiences I can. As a spiritual intention, I'm going to step into this human life with as much openness as I can. So rather than pushing the human elements away, you're welcoming them in more and more and more. So I think of, in a Hindu guise, it's like I think of the yoni, which is the Sanskrit word that encompasses like all the sex organs of the feminine system. It's like a spiritual encompassing of the feminine reproductive organs, and it's like so it's like a yoni opening more and more and more to let more and more in, to have a fuller and fuller human experience. Yeah, I heard that once, say 10 years ago, and it blew my lid, because it goes on to make inferences about traditional spiritual paths, and this might upset some, but it landed very elegantly. A bit of turbulence, I'm sure, penetrating deep into my heart, was that the old systems are designed to wake you up from a narcissistic sleep, like a Vipassana stick on the back to wake you. No, naughty, no. We come back to God, and we come back to God, and we come back to stillness, and we come back to nothing. And of course, that's a crude oversimplification of what they are and aren't, those systems, but it did resonate with some of the experiences I had as a younger guy, and coming back to opening to a fuller experience, to a different kind of experience. And noticing too that in some of these spiritual institutions, there's people who enter, this is actually what Khan says, people enter these institutions and find community and find an up-leveling that happens. I found my people, I found home, and then they get really, really stuck. And they tend to stay at a certain level for a long, long time and wonder what's gone awry here. So this one bit's fun, and I think this might tie it all together. Coming back to something you said before, that if the first sort of like body of work is about the dissolving of a narcissistic ego structure, then the second body of work is about the dissolving a lack of self-worth. It's the opposite. And when you say so many people that I see are working through like a self-denial, it's almost you want to shake them and say, don't you know who you really are? There is this body of work around self-worth. And somehow we live in a world that seems to be staring itself down and going like, we've become so narcissistic. And I don't pretend to know in broad strokes how that all interrelates, but it feels alive to me, because the seekers, the people who are about expanding their spiritual selves in a real way that I talk to, it's nearly always about a lack of self-worth.
Yeah.
And the feedback is so often like, when we really get into this, like, don't you see who you really are?
Almost giving permission.
Yeah.
Do you think, I don't know, one of the theories I have is the modern schooling system is, responsible for a lot of maybe, it instills that idea of authority and subservience. And how does someone as majestic as a god become subservient? I wonder, I often wonder, there's very little talk to our children about the wonder that we even experience for them. I try to express it to my kids, a lot of the time. I remember telling my daughter and my son, but telling my daughter 3 years old just how amazing I think she is and how grateful I am to be her dad, and trying to instill that sense of...
Normalize it.
Yeah, you are quite wonderful.
How would you know if you'd normalized it?
I think maybe when you ask them a question, like, who do you love the most in the world, or something like that, and as long as they're somewhere in there, themselves is in there somewhere, then you know that they've normalized how amazing they are.
Have you run that test with your kids?
Yeah. It's like, I love you, and I love mummy, and I love, myself. Myself is usually in there somewhere. Sometimes it's first, which I love. The first, when they come to the idea of who do you love, the first thing they love is themselves.
Who do you love?
Is it a song?
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if it's, because we hand over our kids to these institutions. And a lot of the time there hasn't been much thought as to what they're being told. You know, we just want to try and get them into the best education system that we can in the district that we're in the price bracket that we're able to afford. And now that seems less and less relevant given what's happening with AI and like how are we going to train our kids.
Are you saying that trying to make a good school decision seems less impactful because there's so many other variables at play?
Yeah. Now, like, you know, the idea of like your kid learning, you know, it's probably more applicable right now to earning a law degree or earning a, you know, like something that you can quite tangibly see. Maybe I can't say tangibly, but you could potentiate that AI is going to be very powerful and effective in that field in a couple of years, if not 5 years.
This has come up a
bunch.
Bunch.
And I know, but then...
not even, I mean more outside of this dialogue.
Right.
The AI is prevalent, this frontier.
And then I kind of go, you know, like, is schooling knocking the, you know, the reverence for one's own life by making us uniform, literally in some instances where your kids have to wear a uniform and all look the same. You know, is that knocking the, you know, that kind of reverence for your existence? Is that knocking at you, and maybe purposefully so? Maybe you're more useful to the state if you don't know.
Oh, I think
we're getting into conspiracy theory territory.
No, I don't think that's. I think it was built in the it's Ukrainian in its origins or whatever.
Prussian, yeah.
Yeah, so it was readiness. The sort of premise that, well, we've got to lead these sheep to somewhere. And it's easy to see it as that as crude or Machiavellian or whatever, but either way, it was the best they had at the time, given the motivations they had at the time. It creates a clunky human system that inspires some stability, but maybe even more desire for change. I just described the entire human system for the entirety of human history. There's always been the presence of this contrast. So say, okay, does the school system take my children away from their own sovereignty in some ways, maybe really big ways and important ways, maybe ways we should engage in trying to fix? Does it? Of course it does, because everything does. This is duality. You being born into a heterosexual masculine incarnation takes you away from your femininity. And you get to decide whether that has gold in it or not. And in some ways you don't get to decide, because life will break you down to force you to realize that it does, maybe over many, many lifetimes. So it might be a bit blunt or something, but contrast is what duality is for, meaning that this world exists the way that it does so that we can have experiences of it and not it to enhance what it is all the time. And thankfully and beautifully, the best way that I can see to operate within that is to allow, okay, if I'm going to, then I better welcome it all in, then, hey? And yes, you do. And then you operate with discernment in that to say, okay, that's really shitty, but somehow I'm going to surrender to it, but I'm also going to surrender to my desire to self-protect in that moment. So sometimes I use the language of like, we're not being judgmental, although certainly judgment as a cognitive faculty is there, but perhaps more discerning, that it's like, okay, well, I accept that this is part of the world's machinations right now, but so is my desire to protect myself from it, so I'm going to lock the door at night. Or I'm going to say, Tolle talks about it as an inner yes, meaning yes to the way the world is. I refuse to disconnect from the universe by saying no to the universe. So an inner yes, but an outer no. It's like, hey, you're great at this, Paulie. Paulie, do you want to go out again tonight? No, bro. No. Thank you so much for thinking of me. But no. And that's something that's quite easy for you. But I think there's an inner yes. Because you probably do like being thought of, and you probably, I'd really like to go to the movies next week, but so I don't want to say no in a way that means you never ask again. So here's a loving no, an outer no, and an inner yes. I don't know if that's a cheap shot to draw it straight to like, universal contrast, because we can unpack the schooling thing. So bringing it back, grounding it in something realer, something a bit more organic. is the child's sovereignty diminished by a hierarchical system? And it's like, I'm sure in some ways, yeah. But the idea that if we made up a vastly better system that championed all sovereignty in this instance, that there wouldn't be contrast pop up in other areas.
Yeah.
It's inevitable in this space, and actually it's a tremendous gift.
It's almost the soul's kind of desire to be free and to express itself in freedom that allows it to pop through or push through the programming or the circumstances in which it finds itself.
So it's just jumping on that. That is what happens. And because we put glad wrap over the soul in the clunkiness of manifest as contrast in this instance, it gets to demonstrate the power of sovereignty, the actual measurable experience of sovereignty. If you were just naturally sovereign swimming around, I mean, the language is getting diluted a bit now, but if whatever the thing you covet was just abundant in all areas, it's very hard to value.
Nothing to push up against. Yeah.
Well, in this instance, yeah. So something easier, like, if you've experienced some lack of money, then you can dance with that experience, work out how nice it is. It's really nice when a bill comes in and you're like, great.
Who cares?
Not even who cares. It's like, geez, I love having power. Geez, I love having hot water.
Yeah.
Geez, I love when a veggie box lands. These are very, affluent third world problems to have.
I thought you were saying
a veggie box lands on the front.
It's good to have power. Like, you felt really powerful because you've got so much money.
Geez, it's good to have electricity flowing through the copper wires underneath my house.
Yeah. The appreciation of what the money is bringing you.
So the premise is that if you had never had any lack of anything in your life, there would be no there'd be no celebratory moments.
Yeah.
There would be no growth. It'd be static. So the schooling system is really clunky in lots of ways, and yet it informs, in my life, there has been moments where I've given my sovereignty away to another. I can think of 3 really key people that I decided to trust beyond myself. Well, 4, that I think about it. And they have taught me in ways that's like, not cool, man, not cool. In ways that I'm clear about, not cool. So that would be the outer no. And the inner yes is like, thank God for them. And this is all just a philosophical waffle fest if those things didn't actually happen. Do you know what I mean? Like this ground, I'm just talking.
Yes.
I'm just talking. But I know that those moments, those chapters utterly destroyed me, parts of me. And because it was so fierce and discernment comes online, it's like I will never give my sovereignty away like that again. And I know I won't because it hurt real bad. But that pain changed me. And so it's a bit of a, hey, fuck you guys, but it's also a thank you so much. Somehow it's both. I think the both is really important. And, the bothness of it is directly resonant with the fact that it's dualistic. There's a high and there's a low. There's a bodily and there's an ethereal. There's an infinite and a finite and so on. Yeah, the contrast thing is really interesting. It can also make topics... Like I find in my own personal life, I mean, it's probably a bit trope, is that you're really politically motivated from 18 to 32 or something like that, and then it tends to something as if that very practice gives way to something else and going, shit, maybe it's not broken. I think it's always been turbulent like this. I don't want to sit in judgment of it, but I don't want to be a total apathetic flake to these things either. How do I manage this? And really, that's not about graduating to a higher perspective. It might look like that, but it's about coming into more authentic relationship with yourself. So I can't go on these roller coaster rides with this political movement anymore like I once did, because it feels like it takes me away from myself. And just in my personal experience of those inner cogs turning, it's like it feels wrong to put myself in opposition to the universe in this way. I'm not saying that it's a moral precipice here. This is an energetic experience I'm having inside my chest, And so the moral arguments are all valid and fine and totally reasonable for somebody to dance with. I just happen to have noticed that they seem to take me away from myself more and more. and someone might go, bro, you are checking out on what really matters. And I go, you might be right. Talk to me in 10 or 20 years and I might have some big apologies to make. But right now, this feels like moving into the most authentic love that I can, which is to say, it feels like luking, not a, not the sort of flaky, air-filled love for all philosophical disposition that we know can be really ungrounded. But the remedy for me for that is like, okay, what feels, if I have an innate energy that I've practiced relationship to over some years and just clean that up, that polish the glass so I can see it and feel it and experience it more and more clearly, where is it headed in this moment? And I want to move with it. And it kind of can't operate in opposition to the broader universe. It works with it all the time. Coincidentally, maybe, or quite logically, you might argue. Does that make some sense?
Yeah, no, 100%.
Can't remember where we started there, man.
Psychopathic behaviour.
Yeah, obviously.
Somewhere.
Yeah, I think we found our way home.
Full circle. Yeah.
Maybe, yeah.
Wow.
The birds often come through, and they annoy you, right, the birds?
I think that because the door's open to the studio, I don't have an extraction system, so I've only got air conditioning. So there's only a certain amount of oxygen in the studio if you close the door. So I keep it open.
I quite like the birds in the.
I don't mind it.
The replays.
Yeah,
it sounds like it's picking up, like it's a bird in 4D kind of thing. It sounds amazing.
I don't like it when they're dominant, but when they're really crows. Right. Like in Australia, they're
really
particularly like nasally and annoying and to me.
Yeah,
I notice it when I do yoga in the mornings and the door's open. There's always the weirdest bird sounds. There's some really weird birds in Australia.
I wonder if they'll ever work out that the land has an energy, the people end up adapting to that energy.
For sure.
What if the land has? What if that influences the sound that takes place on that land? And because this is hilarious to me, but like that when you go that would sound more like a sheep, but it sounds a bit Aussie to me. The crows sound strange.
You read my mind for a second, because a friend of mine had this theory in in our 30s or 20s or 30s, and he was like, whatever the bird life sounds like, the dominant bird life sounds like, that's what he said, in particular the chicks, like the females of the species of the country sound like. So he would be like, Australian chicks sound like that. And I was like, do they though? I met a lot of women with very beautiful voices.
They don't not sound like that. Yeah, of course there are. I think glass.
Yeah.
Even the sound of the word, the sound the bird makes, it feels like about the most Australiana thing ever. And I reckon it does correlate to accent.
From going from New Zealand and then coming here, there's a very stark difference in the sound of the landscape. And the one that just blows my mind every time is a kookaburra. I just can't get around.
There's nothing like that as far as I know.
It's a remarkable sound.
It's my favourite bird.
Is it?
Yeah.
There's so much.
It's so distinct.
It sounds so joyful. Like it's laughing all the time. I mean, I know that's everybody says that, but
yeah.
And again, maybe we're just anthropomorphizing the bird, but I don't know. They're such a unique and interesting creature. There's just nothing in New Zealand like that. However, have you heard a kiwi? The noise the kiwi makes?
No.
It's a very rare experience because they're such quiet and hidden birds. They're like flightless. They can't fly around.
For sure.
They kind of long beak and all that sort of stuff.
So they're endangered, right?
Yes.
But not extinct.
No.
So how many would you have seen in your life?
Oh, like in real life?
Yeah.
None. No, they're so private and they're so well hidden that they don't, unless you go looking for them. So I've seen, a couple in a zoo, or in a sanctuary.
Well, that's a bit platypusy in its way.
Yeah.
Because I think I might have seen one in the wild, maybe two.
A platypus?
But plenty of people go their lives without seeing a platypus, I would suggest. It's cold waters too.
But the noise they make is like, it does not match this kind of serene, cute looking bird. It's like this very guttural kind of like noise.
Nightmare.
Yeah, a little bit.
Well, possums and koalas, the first time you hear a koala make a sound, it changes a person.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
My teddy bear never made that noise when I was a kid, you know.
I'm out your window and go, Mum, I'm pretty sure predators
Someone's coming to kill us.
Predator? That's not 1984 though. What's he doing there?
So, question time. How do you love yourself when it feels like your brain has made a giant list of reasons of how inadequate or unlovable you are, and is constantly searching for more reasons to back that up so you can remain a victim and not have to face your fear of failure? How do you love yourself when your mind has amassed a million reasons not to? Yeah. The interesting thing is it feels like a natural flowing question. I'm not ridiculing the question, but just noticing a pivot point in it. It's like a natural flowing question. I really want to love myself, but there's a massing, intellectual posturing against that. Mm-hmm. And then the victimhood bit at the end feels like the pivot. Well, because I think what he's saying is... It's like judging himself for feeling that bad about himself. It's like an extra judgment in a different direction. Yeah, I think my take on what he's saying is that you're constantly searching for more reasons so you can stay as a victim. So stay passive and not have to face your fear. The roots of why you feel that way about yourself. Yeah. It's a biggie, like it's such a beautifully vulnerable question. Yeah, and an everyday kind of thing. But I think the reason I don't launch into a question is because this has been a flavour of my fortnight as well. Been like feeling less. What's been coming up is a part of me that has less self-esteem. Yeah. That doesn't innately feel connected. Is to sit in these one of my favourite like retreat vibes or ambient environments. The way that these guys ran this retreat was that they would sit and until something inspired comes, we sit. It's like, oh, that's so... It's nice, isn't it? Screw convention, screw scheduling. Yeah. That's so beautiful. Give yourself the... Do you want me to repeat it? No, I want to sit without the crow noises if possible. What comes to me in this instance is... What are the roots of those thoughts that would tear you to shreds? What are they? We would love to jump straight to the higher perspective of I'm wonderful and I am love. If you're anything like me, the question asker, then it's as if, oh, where did my self-esteem go? Quick, get it, suck it back, get back to the, scramble back up this, hill that is sliding down the side of loose gravel, I'm imagining. Scramble back up there and it's like, do that enough and it's like, okay. That doesn't really work. I can't time travel back to where I was. Maybe here, in this flavour of icky mud, quicksand, maybe this flavour is what's appropriate. Maybe this is the grist for the mill that I want to work with right now. And so what does that look like? What's the root of these horrible thoughts or these apparently unhelpful things that, man, if we've lived for even a little while on some sort of spiritual tract, then we notice that things tend to, wow, I'm really glad that happened. I'm really glad that shit came up in the way that it did because it fertilized soil for a whole new way of being. About to sneeze. So it's not a new idea, but the idea that rather than noticing the part that wants to retrace our steps and get back to where we were, sometimes that may be wonderful to retrace your steps and try to work out where we fell off the horse. But in this instance, I want to get back to feeling high self-esteem and connection to myself and like I could interface with anything because all I really need is me and my essence is enough, which is, I think the foundation of all the spiritual paths is that you are it. You're God and you are enough. And it looks like you need these things from outside yourself, but the one you're looking for is really you. But in the nuance of personal practice, when we fall into thoughts that want to tear us to shreds like this,
rather than trying to get back to a place of high self-esteem. It's like, be exactly where you are and explore. Explore rather than trying to ascend back up the mountain, say fuck it, and descend down the hill. Descend into the feeling. To me, this speaks to more yin tones of going into the core of it. And Paul was talking before about how scary it can be to face the stuff, and you obviously felt that in the question askers, base energy, motivation of the question. To turn around and move into it. What is this thing that does not feel worthy? You might ask, where does this come from? That's like a more psychological model, and that you might find that when I was small, somebody said something like that. Most people, I don't know, along the road find that, like Paul was talking a month ago or something about, the young boy singing in the class and working out that, in fact, what he was told when he was young impacts now on the way that he sings as an older man. So an impression you coexisted with when you were little exists in your field now and plays out now. So the premise being that what you're moving through now is bringing stuff up and out of you into a more tangible place in your field that you can actually work with. And right now it looks like emotions tearing yourself to shreds. So feeling into that, what is that? It's like, as an example for me this week, realizing that I was afraid. I thought I was annoyed. But when I'm really alone with this, I realize that I'm afraid. And just that matriculation, just that nuance of pulling that apart and recognizing I thought I felt one way, but it turns out I felt another, it felt like 99% of the job at hand. Just to realize the difference between those two things and to sit with it. And this part of me, in this instance, it felt like a young part of me, but this part of me that was in the shadow, all of a sudden felt seen, was illuminated by the light of my own consciousness, which is to say, I took the time to look and I saw, and the seeing was enough. It was so gratified and nourished and satiated by having been seen that it unfolded all by itself. And it's like a little flower bud that just pops open, or whatever analogy one might use, like a part that's been left out in the weather that is brought into the house and sat by the fireplace and said, yo, sorry I left you out there. You're so welcome in here now. And lo and behold, we tried to walk back up the hill and kept sliding back down. We spent so much energy trying to feel a way that we didn't feel. Inversely, we spent so much energy denying the emotional truth of what was so, to the point of exhaustion, and then we turned around and moved downhill with the natural momentum that was there, descended into a deeper state of feeling and emotional recognition. It meant we had to walk through the mystery, and we didn't know. We weren't sure what the fuck was going on. And then we found a part that was left out in the cold just by feeling. And I'm not implying this takes wisdom. The wisdom necessary is in the process. It's like it's already there, as if there are a million helping hands behind the scenes waiting to aid you through this process. And all you got to do is float downstream. In this instance, not fighting the pain, but sitting with the pain. And sure, sitting on the couch in a meditative posture does create an environment for introspection that can be really helpful, but it's not doing it. A meditation technique isn't doing it. You being with yourself is doing it. You being brave enough to not distract yourself enough just to sit there and see what's there. And then all this natural intuitive wisdom comes up to just, okay, I'm just feeling this. Fuck, it feels scary, but somehow good. How can those two things be true at once? How can I be scared and motivated? How can I feel fear and love? How can I feel terrified and seen and held at the same time? And yet it is so. And then it tends to unfold. And then the irony being you wanted to get back to the top of the hill, and by going to the bottom of the hill, you find yourself on top of the hill. But it's not just that. It's more, because you descended into a part of yourself and you shed light, and you then get to reintegrate, recognize, which is to recognize, to recognate. That's a borrowing from a Neil Donald Walsh Conversations with God thing, that to recognate to recognize something in yourself and bring it back into the fold, to take a wisdom of old and reintroduce it to a functional part of today. So not only are we atop the hill, but we get to bring more of ourselves with us, and we feel bigger and steadier and with a greater capacity to step into future adventures just like that, with a greater capacity to love other just as they are. This is kind of this pronounced power of sovereignty that beautifully lends itself to humility as well. So, in spiritual vernacular, we want humility at all costs, but this is how you have that as well as this great sovereign power as well, where the individual being actually did grow. The individual did expand. You might call it the enlightening of ego, because you did get closer to God and you did feel closer to every being on the planet, but the Luke of it all, the Paul of it all, the question asker of it all got bigger as well. You feel steadier and you feel like you've got more to offer those that you love and the species and whatever cause you're working to. So to me, that's a very basic answer. It almost feels like sucking eggs, but sometimes that's where the juice is revisiting things in a basic way, but recognizing the sort of fierceness that's there. And when we really work with that, the fierce reward that's in it.
It reminds me of what you were talking about earlier in terms of contrasts. What is this moment trying to, or what is this feeling trying to teach me? And in doing so, when you move through it, the abundance that waits on the other side,
Yeah.
In line with that for me. I kind of equate it with like, I had this fear of dying when I was a kid. Like I was about 7 or 8, and I felt like this nothingness was coming for me. And I'd cry myself to sleep, and my parents would try their best.
How old did you say?
7 or 8.
Wow.
And then I remember my parents trying to help me. My mum bought me Dale Carnegie's How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. As the chapters are like how to don't saw sawdust, and if life gives you lemons make lemonade kind of thing. And
pretty yang.
I just didn't
push through.
I didn't understand, but they were trying their best. They were doing their best to try and help.
God, imagine the blood, sweat and tears that went into we're going to give an 8-year-old
What's wrong with this kid?
Well, the stress. Imagine that.
Totally. I might have been older, actually. I might have been 10 or 11 maybe. I think we're in the new
25. Okay, it was yesterday.
But I remember...
existential crisis at 7 or 8.
Yeah. And I remember thinking that I've ruined my life. Like I'm never going to be able to get through. And, I was able to sort of sedate myself from that with, girls, music throughout my adolescence and teenage years, but that kind of purveying feeling still lingered. And I remember being given, that's a weird thing to say, but I remember being given, and I was in my mid-20s, I think, and I was back at home. I'd moved to Australia already, and I was back in New Zealand at my old home where I grew up, and I was just lying in bed, and this thought just arrived like a gift, and it was like, you don't really know what is going to happen. So the truth of it is, you have to exist at 50-50. You have to exist at... the truth of it is that you don't you are going to die and there's going to be nothing, and the other half of that 50% is you're going to die and there's going to be everything, and you're going to go back to the isness. And so for me, and it sounds like I'm getting off topic, but for me to come to that realization, sure, it took all that time, but to be able to move through that and get to a place where you're comfortable with death in your 20s, for me was such a gift. It was such a beautiful, like I really appreciated that hard moment in my childhood of working through that moment and getting to the other side of it. And then getting to decide, the other half of that for me was then going, well, if I have to live at 50-50, can I push the barrier on it a bit, and can I live wherever I want? And it's like, yeah, of course you can. You get to decide where you live. I was like, oh, well, the idea of reincarnation makes me feel way more comfortable and brings way more happiness into my life. And so I decided that's what I was going to believe. And it might have tipped it to 51-49, or it might have gone 75-25. But there's a beautiful thing in being able to move through whatever that's trying to teach you, and then getting to a point where you actually realize there is purpose in being able to decide your own beliefs. You know, you get to overwrite the master program, and you get to decide that.
Wow.
Does that make any sense at all?
It does, but it also pitches to the unknowable to me. Like there were insights that made sense, that had a rationality that helped you ground your existence, but they pointed to a great mystery that you'll never solve, and you've just got to keep walking or allowing it to walk through you. It's going to say you walk down it, allow it to walk through you, allow the universe to have the experience of Paul through you. And part of that is that, yeah, you're divine and you're all of it and you know everything that's ever been and ever will be, but you're giving yourself this deliberate amnesia for now, and let's have this experience. And the juxtaposition of that is like, and there's also free will in this. There's no free will. This is just happening. The universe is going to rape you with love. I really...
Wow, you really dug into the deep end of
if you've ever done,
metaphor.
I mean, if you've ever had high dose hallucinogenics, most people I talk to who've done that know what, like DMT, for example, feels like an RAPE of your soul in a beautiful way.
Now he spells it out.
Yeah, sorry. It's such a triggering word, and yet there's a space in which it can exist lovingly, which is a total what's the word I'm looking for? Not oxymoron. What's the paradox?
Yeah. Juxtaposition or paradox. Yeah.
Yeah. So this dance with free will that you're pitching to in the middle of all that. Yeah, that's been an unfolding thing for me, though. Like the power of your perspective. I know we spoke about it last week or the week before. Still blown away by this primary schooler having that experience in such a vivid way.
I was a weird kid.
Yeah.
I remember, like, I may have told you this already, but we can cut this out because it doesn't mean anything. But I remember being like 5 years old.
I don't want to already.
And I know that I was that age because I had this little BMX, and that's what I had this experience on. So I was 5 or 6 probably.
Yeah, the bike measure.
It was a Mighty Max. It was called.
It's called bicycle chronology.
Yeah. And I remember cycling along the footpath because we used to live in a cul-de-sac, and I used to just love jumping off curbs. And just seeing how high I could get and stuff. And I remember thinking about, is my life mine to make the decision, or am I stuck in preordained destiny? And I'm using grown-up language. I was just thinking these feelings as a kid. I wasn't. And then I remember going towards the curb as fast as I could, and I was super excited. I was going to jump in my mind. I'm going to jump. And then I turned away at the end. And I was like, yes, I cheated destiny. I tricked the preordained nature of my existence. And then I went, but what if it knew I was going to turn away at the end? And that was my conundrum. And I never ever got to the end of it. But that's like me at 5 or 6, which is gnarly, right? Like,
yes.
I only realize that that's odd now looking back. At the time, you're just having your experience and you're just having your existence.
Well, I've been listening to you talk for 10 years, and that's it blows me away. That's I'm speechless. A kid to contemplate free will and destiny in such a vivid way, as if he's the first human being to ever contemplate it, which would be authenticity. What did you say before? I said, that actually reminds me of a Matt Kahn thing. You're like, damn, I thought I came up with that. That means that it was so authentic. It's like flying into space as if, or like living on an island and leaving the island on a boat and then finding that there's civilization, but going, but it was. you were existing in a completely different dimension before you tumbled into that. The fact that others are contemplating this too.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's there's almost
we can't edit that out. That's really beautiful.
Really, it feels a bit self-indulgent, to be honest, but it's true. So I guess
I'd want to bask in the glow of all of that. I also part of me wants to share, because I wasn't having philosophical insights at that point that I can remember. I remember having energetic experiences.
Yeah,
and
right.
even just saying it makes me feel scared, because new things I'm discovering in my life were that there was more fear in them than I realized. Fear is not a thing I remember feeling as a young kid, and I'm discovering that part of that is blunting, that there was a part of me that I shut down in order to cope with other areas of my life. That fear is now just emerging. So when I was a teenager and then got exposed to institutional spirituality, esoterics, etc., through esoteric Hinduism, this concept of us, there's a mimicking your spine is the sushumna, the main energy channel of your body that wakes up from your sacrum and your base chakra and spirals up and out and awakens all the chakras as it ascends through your throat and your third eye, and clearing out nadis, which is like meridian channels, which is like energy channels of the body in their system. It continues to spiral up from sacrum up out of crown, and then you unite with God, and there's this flow of this connection between your sort of feminine base. And it's a snake. Kundalini energy moves up through the Sushumna as a snake, and there's a phenomenon in that culture. They describe like this rushing of Kundalini that you can experience, and eyes rolling up into your head, and maybe your tongue and touches the roof of your mouth. These different things. So culturally, I was exposed to it, and I thought, well, then it started to happen again as a teenager. And it's sort of like lofty and profound, like the plant medicine just kicked in and everything's really psychedelic, but it also just felt like something just happening as well. Like it was a rock star kind of, wow, let's note that this is going on, and also like this is pedestrian and there's nothing big deal. But what it did reveal was that I was having this as a little kid. And you telling that story just now, as I'm a 39-year-old processing these layers of fear that are emerging from my childhood, I realized that those experiences were really scary for me. And I didn't know. I thought I was just normalizing this pulsing out of my body experience that I was having with my whole body. And I realized that I was quite scared, but that was a part of me even then that I left out in the cold. And one might say that it's as I've grown into myself, that the house I've made of my heart is now large and robust enough and warm enough inside, and conscious enough, of course, to open the door and go, fuck man, I didn't even see you sitting there. Come on in. What you been doing? And, you need to cry for 40 years? Why 40? Oh, because that's exactly how long I left you outside. Okay. Come on in and let's do this 37.5 years of crying or whatever. I heard from a therapist once that that it's not just letting the higher self letting the inner child, the adult self letting the inner child back in the door and saying, you can process that here with me, and it going, oh my God, you're the one I've been waiting for this whole time. But it's also this layering of, and I don't need you to process it anytime soon. You can cry for forever. I love you the way that you are, and 0% of me requires you to change. You can be like this forever. You can sit on the bus. You're not driving the fucking thing anymore. I'm going to drive the bus. You sit right next to me though, and move through whatever you need to move through for forever. And as we've touched on many times, that's exactly what our flesh and blood children want from us, is to go, you can express whatever you need to here, and I will not ask you to get off it. You process it to the full breadth. And I think one of the qualities of the yin parts of us is they don't just want to be seen and welcomed in, but if they know that part of you wants to bring them in to allow them to process, so you can return to more pleasing versions of yourself, so you can return to more convenient aspects of character. If they know that there is that intent, they'll feel it somewhere deep inside of them and go like, oh, you want to utilize me. You want me to return to something more beautiful for you, which is not criminal to want the best of somebody or whatever, but that it'll represent a non-safety. And our kids recognize that, the women in our life recognize that as straight men, and the feminine aspects of ourself recognize that as let's just get back up the top of the hill and feel better and have high self-esteem again. It's like, no, we need to stay as long as we need to stay. It's not cleaned up till it's cleaned up.
Beautiful.
All right, you're done it now.
I was surprised that do you think like the fear, again, cut this bit out. But that fear, thanks for sharing that. It's, really beautiful. But that fear in you, obviously it felt something powerful. Did you share that to the adults around you at the time? And
no.
Right. So they couldn't help you because
who knows? Not in the memory. No.
You didn't feel that you could share it with them.
No. And you can imagine,
because you felt weird.
There isn't that level of personality in the memory. It's you might say it's primal. So the convenience would be, let's say he's not 3, let's say he's 3 months. And then all of a sudden you can, those intellectual ponderings naturally recede.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I've done some beautiful, almost hypnotic walkthroughs with therapists where it's like of rebirthing sort of thing. Not deliberately, it's just something spontaneously happened, but I understand there is a convention that people do rebirthing work. And that just sort of happened in this therapy session, which I'm very grateful for. It was like that. And it was like dancing in primeval energy flow. Because I imagine your eyes don't work yet. Yeah. Your ears have yet to come online properly. You've been floating in warm amnion for, 9 months, and now here you are, and what's going on? Like, really, like it's almost pre-human, because there's so many dependencies. When we discuss the human perspective, so many sensory inputs are implied, and relativity is implied. And how could you possibly understand relativity when this is your first moment of it? What is this other?
Yeah. Is it one of your first memories?
That one I'm describing came up in therapy. So it's not something that
was even sitting on the surface.
And what we might be, so if you've got these vivid memories of your childhood and I don't, that might mean that
they're just moments. Like, my first moment I remember is frustration at not being able to move my body freely and being on my front and just being like fucking so angry that this fucking arm and this hand won't work how I want it to work.
It blows my mind.
Why? I think every child goes through that, but just whether you remember.
I've never spoken to a human being that remembers it.
But whether you remember it or not.
I mean, I've heard inferences of it on like media or something, like someone on a YouTube channel describing it, and I get that. It just makes me wonder, like, we're different beings in so many ways, but one of the ways might be that there was a higher level of something for me and a proportionately lower level of something for you. And in this instance, I'm present to it being fear. So let's say that there was more fear in my experience. Just so we're very clear, I'm not throwing shade at anybody here. No. And not at your parents and not at mine.
No.
But pitching to I came in with a vibrational energy signature, coordinate point in the universe that was such that I was going to draw in certain experiences. So everything fits that. So on that very esoteric level, there is no victimhood because there's me relating to myself only. I'm the only one in the room.
Yeah.
And so that's the way that I see that. But there are moments where the fears or whatever arises is more personal than that, where there's a moment of betrayal in your adulthood, or there's a moment of, overwhelm and panic in another. And when we do isolate those parts of ourselves with an esteem of love and integration and embodiment and healing, then it is important. I want to be clear. It is important to meet it to speak the language of humanity, to meet it in its raw humanness, which is to say that fear was real and was relational, that you were afraid of that person because of these things, so that you can speak the language to the being, which in this case is very human. So I could talk to the 3-year-old and go, hey, of course you feel that way. Of course you do, my love, in order to welcome it back in and really meet it. Okay, so this one's, I have a feeling this person would be okay with not being anonymous, but given there's no harm in anonymity here, it reads more like a statement, which we've asked for questions from this community of people or across these communities of people, and most of the time we get statements, which I think is really beautiful because you can just you can just look out across the landscape of your own mystery, of your own body of work, and just go like, that's what interests me, that's what I see, and then share it, and then it'll catalyze something in us or not.
Yeah.
And it seems to catalyze lots of good stuff. So from an anonymous person, I've gone back to Judaism. My relationship with, I'm not sure if they've deliberately misspelled God or to save themselves from having to spell it. My relationship with G something D has saved me from the madness of worshipping my own mind. I'm keen to know if other people are turning back to religion in a world where the me, in quotation marks, model seems to be failing.
Great question. I mean, it's a great statement. Like, so excited for that person. I feel like I feel like in times of perceived madness, we all have to find a way of life. And I think there's always been madness, and there always will be. You know, like you look back at those photos from, is it 1912, before the Great Depression, and there's a dude walking probably in New York or something, the sandwich board, the sky is falling, or God is coming to get you, or the devil's here, or whatever.
Judgment Day.
Yes,
Yeah.
judgment, exactly. There's always a reason to be, intoxicated by the madness. And I think anything that catalyzes you to return back to God can be nothing but positive. And notice I'm saying turn back to God, not necessarily religious studies. That can be a way, for sure. My personal feeling is that a lot of the things that I've seen have made the religious structures in society, and I haven't seen a lot, but in the West, let's say, have not been resonant with my experience of God and my experience of what I want to associate with and be not led by, but encouraged by or uplifted by. And that doesn't mean that they're bad. It doesn't mean anything other than, we all have to find our own way back to God. I think there seems to be a very strong turn. So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you might know better than I. I have a friend who's very heavy into the Vedas and into Eastern philosophy, and he said we're right at the turning point of the Kali Yuga right now, which is the furthest away from God that we ever are, and that there is a turning back towards God that's coming or is arriving. And my experience of glimpsing the beauty of God, the thing that we, existence maybe, in brief meditations, or whether it's been plant medicine, is that is the only game in town. And that there is so much. There's so much meatiness to be had from that experience, particularly if you can find a way that is yours. And that might be singing in church every Sunday. It might be that. And the prayers and the priest, leads you towards that journey. It definitely may be that. But it also may be, building your own church inside your mind, and every morning talking to God, meditating. It might be devotion to others. It might be, there's so many ways to turn back towards God. Like you were saying earlier in the podcast, there's only one of us in the room. And when that is a lived experience, I tend to operate from a different place. It doesn't mean I'm there all the time. I endeavor to be, and fail, but I'm endeavoring to be in that space. And I think I commend that person, that's such a beautiful, it's such a beautiful thing to get to a place in one's life where you realize this materialistic ideology you've been born into has a shelf life. And I think the older you get as well, at least that's my experience of it. When you get older, I've been flirting with spirituality my whole life and reading lots of different books from my 20s onwards, through meeting, mentors and friends who introduced me into that sort of stuff. But I think it was only after I sort of mid-30s, I had an event happen to me in my 40s which kind of catalyzed a need to make a decision about what kind of existence I was living. And I think it's, without getting too deep into things, I think it's beautiful. I think everyone has to find a way. If you don't have a way of living, if you don't have, and it can be capitalism, it can be materialism, but I think that pretty quickly capitalism or materialism has an end point. And that might be lifetimes, like it might be your 5th, 10th, 50th life of materialism. You start to go, it's not really, continuing to just consume stuff and have stuff and be powerful in this space is not giving me what it used to. And I think everyone has to find a way, or the way finds you. Because without it, you're kind of cast at sea in a rudderless boat. And I feel like everyone's got an eye on the horizon, but you can only get where you want to go when you've kind of got a rudder in the water. And that's kind of how it feels for me. But amazing, awesome. And yes, it's happening everywhere. It seems to be at least it could be just in the echo chamber that is my life, but it seems like, everybody is turning to some kind of spiritualism. I have a friend who's a successful coach in Sydney, and she was saying, like, the language is different, so it's being
reformed.
Yeah, it's being altered. Yeah. So she's coaching in the corporate space, and she's bringing spirituality via, I think we've spoken about this before, via quantum physics, because it makes more sense in that space. But there is a very, very deep desire, particularly in very successful business people, to squeeze more meaning out of their life, or at least continue to expand their experience of existence beyond the material plane. And I think everybody gets there in the end. Does that make any sense?
No, it's beautiful. It's a bit intoxicating to listen to. What comes to mind for me, and I think this can complement what Paul shared, because it's peripheral to it, so no notes, kind of vibe. What is religion anyway? So certainly we were raised in a time where religion became stigmatized, and for good reason in lots of ways, that people would be skeptical about organized structure and what is your intention, and is there dogma here? And these are reasonable things to ask of an institution and self all the time. Am I doing this because it is aligned with my Paulness or my Lukeness, or am I doing this because I've got so much momentum in doing this? This isn't the only way I know. So checking back in to make sure this is really for me. So if one was to turn back to religion, like the question asker is hurtling down that hill, I wonder, like, what gives religion its power? Is it that it has inherent power, or is it the practitioners that bring the power to it? So is it the joy of the gospel singers, or is it the Christ that they're singing about that has the power? And there are definitely radio frequencies you can tune into where you will feel the power of the gospel singers in that example. They are Like from a Hindu point of view, like does the mantra have power, or is it the beings giving their bandwidth, their consciousness to the experience, or to the practice of actually chanting those words, that they bring their power to it, and that's what the power is. And it's a dichotomy of ideas and a bit of a paradox that both in their own right are ecstatically powerful, and yet it's true that you could isolate either. Like, is the one praying to Christ, did they have any power in it? It's like, yeah, the reverence in which they bring to that is incredibly powerful. Not just the piety, but they're bringing something very sincere that is truly them to that. And so that's the power. So I'm sure, I don't know Judaism well, but I'm sure it's flawed like the other religions are. And so coming back to that, it's like, well, if the focus is on the reverence and the practice, it's the you in it that matters. And if this gives you more access to the depths of that, to the infinity, no doubt that is, then whew, like strap in. What wonder.
It's almost the thing that powers it inside you is the thing that's important.
Yeah.
Your desire to uplift, your desire to be better, be greater, more love, more expansion.
Yeah. And it's just the method you decide to practice from that radio station we're tuned into there is actually kind of irrelevant. It's a little bit like the weather. It's like we were dancing this dance of divinity, and it was rainy, so we were wearing raincoats. It's like, well, it's kind of superfluous. It's to the primary thing, which was the dance, the authenticity of the dance. Yeah, so you're tapping into divinity the way you're tapping into divinity. Who really cares? There's evidence that you can collate to this end, and that is like when you walk about. I've talked to, priests or Christian practitioners, whatever, and there's the full spectrum. There's the crew that are just cool people, community members, or whatever, like local members of the local town community, sort of that overlaps with whatever. And then there's people who, it's as if God is God is God is God is God, and you use the method to get access to that part of self, to get access to that part of the one, when those two things are interchangeable there. And then the method kind of melts away. Yeah, he's wearing a white cloak with a white robe with a little black square across the collar rather than another version of that thing, but it feels pretty superfluous. The sparkle in his eyes is the sparkle in his eyes is the sparkle in her eyes, and so on. And so it doesn't really matter. And that is something. As a little kid, I felt very at home in churches. I felt very at home looking at statues of Christ, and I don't know why. And there was something really beautiful. And I always felt like it was my relationship with that statue. And then the same thing happened when you're practicing in a different kind of temple. And they don't call it statues, they call it murtis, they call it something else elsewhere in a third place. And it really, Buddhist sacred sites in the Buddhist world, talking to Islamic practitioners and their devotion to Allah. And it's all the same to me. And the same sort of wacky distortions of human psychosis and hurting people through it and all that kind of distraction and violence and stuff that can happen is probably in all of them. I don't think that there is a major religion exempt from the ugly bits. So it's the reverence in that way that is very important on that level, where the reverence brings us to it. And that's ladled out in direct proportion to the access to self it gives us. And so yeah, it's beautiful in that esteem that this person is re-entering. Any closing thoughts?
I just no. The thing that's coming back to me throughout the whole pod has been like that Krishnamurti thing about whether when you start following something, so there's a seed inside you that fires, and then you want to know more, expansion of self, and that's you guiding yourself to expansion. And then the structures that you inevitably end up at become the prison that you end up in, because they become the methodology, and then they must protect that methodology through actually just being the structure that it is.
So fierce for somebody that it was the embodiment of institution in so many ways. Like Krishnamurti is often championed as the one who brought it to the West, and to bring a whole different institution and yet be the embodiment of the dissolution of institution at the same time. So to be
that's what
the
he said,
method and the counter method.
That's what he said
really powerful.
At the beginning.
Yeah.
When they gave him the Theosophical Society, I can't remember what it was called, the Rising Sun or something, whatever it was.
It's like New York or something, isn't it?
His first, England, I think. His first statement was to dissolve what they'd put him in charge of and say that, these structures are a means to an end, but not the end. And there's something so beautifully reverent but powerful about you must find your own way to this.
Tolle talks about it in, I guess it's Power of Now, in sort of his early discourses, and sort of like typically understood as a Zen aligning cat. I don't know that he would say that, but that's what sort of the third party observations have been. But that like I will allow method of breath focus, but anything beyond that is just too much method, because the attachment risk is just super glue and a bit sticky. And
so his wisdom comes from an internal. So he hasn't studied, or like Tolle's thing is like an enlightened cat, and that's where the messaging's coming from.
I happened to have spoken to somebody who knew him before, I suppose he became a teacher in his own right, and I think that was probably in a Hindu background,
right? But
I don't know. So it's probably multi-denominational and eclectic in its way. But I don't think that he talks about Christ.
Right.
In at least his earlier texts. I've only read the first 2 books, I think, and then consumed quite a bit. I saw him live once. That's pretty cool. I think that its essence strikes people as a repackaging of Zen. I've heard that put that way before, but I love the multi-denominationalness of it, or the absence of a denomination, because of the liberation that can bring to it, and the convenient westernization and all that stuff. It's the right flavor for the right time, but the little touches of Christ, but also the sort of the dissolving of method. So I think it's Murti that's like you use one thorn to remove another thorn, meaning you use a method to help you ascend to a different version of yourself. And then the work continues. And so to do the next block of work, you've now got to throw both thorns away. You use a thorn to remove that first thorn. Now you have 2 thorns in your hand, and you dispose of them and you move forward. And deinstitutionalization can be really tricky because things are quite sticky. It's like, if you deify something as apparently formless as meditation, then you are making love to the doorway rather than going through the doorway.
So that's a very, very strong image of like
dude shagging a doorknob. Yeah. I think it's maybe what it's derived, what it's for is to go, well, that's inefficient. There's got to be a better way.
Keep walking.
Yeah, just a little further. And the truth is the thing that we're inferring that isn't the doorway that's beyond it is you. So as exalted and ecstatic as a method may be, and we could say a methodism, Buddhism, Hinduism, Sufism, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and all their esoteric off-branchings, as exquisite as all as that is, it's nothing compared to what your true nature, to what you actually are. And coming right back to this whole thing of the second stage enlightenment being about the dissolving of an absence of self-worth, that feels pretty resonant to me, those 2 ideas. You will never run out of reason to love yourself more. And the kind of love we're looking for is conveniently will intoxicate you with a love for the rest of humanity. That's additive and generative and a bit irresistible. And you won't have to fear the ego expansion.